We're very, very frightened.
Just what is the Fundamentalist Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, the FLDS? What do they believe, and how do they pass those beliefs down from generation to generation? The group split off from Mormonism in the late 19th century over the issue of polygamy. Mormons renounce the practice. Fundamentalists believe the more wives a man takes, the closer he gets to God. FLDS members tend to live in isolated compounds like Colorado City on the Arizona-Utah border. The group was largely left alone for generations until 2003, when one of its members was convicted of bigamy and sexual abuse of a minor. That's when the group's self-proclaimed prophet, Warren Jeffs, bought more than 1,000 acres of land in Texas and began building a new home base.
Law enforcement was starting to investigate much more seriously the activities in Colorado City and in Hilldale, where the faith is based, so he knew it wasn't necessarily safe. That's why he went underground.
I believe his intention was to cherry pick the cream of the crop of the most faithful. I think he was just slowly trying to build his Zion, his kingdom.
Warren took the most faithful and moved them down there. They are the ones who would never turn their backs and never betray him. He thought he would be much safer in Texas than in Utah or Arizona.
The yearning for Zion Ranch is nearly 50 miles from the nearest city and is extremely secluded. According to former FLDS member Rena Mackert, that's no accident. The idea, she says, is to cut off information into and out of the compound. She says this isolation makes it easier to enforce strict adherence to FLDS doctrine and discourage any questioning about the group or its leaders.
They control everything in everyone's lives. They control what they eat, what they can or can't drink, how they dress, how they do their hair, whether the men can have facial hair, what's acceptable and what's not. They are truly a cult.
Rick Ross has been studying cults since the early 1980s and closely watching the FLDS since the early 1990s. He says the group has about 12,000 members and exhibits some cult-like characteristics. For example, he says cults isolate and control their members, foster an us versus them attitude about the outside world, make it difficult for members to leave, and demonize those who do leave.
The FLDS would be comparable to groups called cults in the way in which they manipulate and control the members of the organization. When I say that, I'm talking about control of the environment, control of communication, control of information. If you can control everything that goes into the mind, you can control the mind.
But attorney Ken Driggs, a Mormon who has written about the FLDS, disagrees.
I do not see them as a cult. I do see them as non-traditionally religious. I do see them as people attempting to live their religion but kind of outside of the mainstream society. They recognize that there are tensions between the kinds of practices and customs in mainstream society and the way they want to live, and they want to retreat to the lifestyle that they think is important.
Good morning to everyone.
The FLDS bristles at the idea that it's a cult or that its women are victims of oppression or mind control. These FLDS mothers, appearing on NBC's Today Show 13 days after their children were taken away in the April 3rd raid, insist their freedom hasn't been curtailed at all.
There is no force in our work. It's all choice. Everyone's allowed to choose.
Could it be that our modern American take on things just keeps us from understanding who these people really are? Forensic psychologist N.G. Burrell has not met these women. His comments are based on their interview. He attributes at least some of the group's problems to a conflict of cultures.
How could they love us if we abused them?
I think this is right here is the crux of the entire situation. It's how you define cult. It's how you define normal. It's what you define as abuse and not abuse. From their perspective, I have no doubt that what went on in terms of the conduct between adult males and their adolescent daughters was not abuse from their perspective.
I have my children, and they mean a lot to me.
It's not that this was sort of a wanton sex orgy. I don't think that that's what was going on, but it's about fundamental beliefs and the beliefs that are out of line with the rest of the culture.
So if a woman is willing to obey the strict FLDS doctrine of submitting to men and allowing her daughters to marry young as she herself likely did, isn't she just practicing her religion, her constitutional right? Or, as the state of Texas originally alleged, is she enabling her daughter to be the victim of child sexual abuse, all in the name of God?
The women have to hand over their children in order for the men to abuse them in this organization. What they would say is that this is how they've been raised, this is what they've been taught, and it's true. There is a cycle of abuse that creates the organization that they are. It doesn't give them an excuse for their behavior, but this is what's been done within this group for over 100 years.
The music we listened to was priesthood music. The books that we read were sermons. A lot of our time we sat out under a big tree we had in our backyard sewing, you know, by hand, maybe some little doll dresses.
For Kathy Jo Nicholson and for many girls, the FLDS was an idyllic existence, a safe haven from an evil world. One of 13 siblings, Kathy Jo was raised by her father and 3 mothers in Sandy City, Utah. From an early age, like all FLDS children, she was taught to obey the prophet and never to question the group's doctrine. Among other things, she was told marriage was her only path to heaven, and that the group's spiritual leader, the prophet Leroy Johnson, was an immortal God. And she believed.
It was just a very religious environment, very strict. We got up in the morning and we knelt and we said prayer. The art that we could have on the wall was either a quote from the prophet or from books or sermons of former prophets.
If Kathy Jo or anyone inside the FLDS community showed frustration with the rules, they were simply reminded to keep sweet.
Keep sweet means keep your mouth shut and follow the program, or we'll crush you. That's what keep sweet means. This mantra of keeping sweet, it's basically if you don't toe the line and keep this smile on your face and do exactly what the prophet or your father or your priesthood head tells you to do, you know what? We're gonna come down on you like a load of bricks.
Keep sweet was just the standard that we lived by. It was a way to rein us back in, to snuff out any kind of emotions we may feel.
Much was expected of the FLDS flock, but as this Warren Jeffs sermon shows, most of the burden fell on the women.
Many young men, when they receive their first wife, are just so untrained. And the woman, if she's not careful, will be overbearing and always ask permission for what she wants. Young ladies, build up your husband by being submissive. That's how you will give your children the success. You will want your children to be obedient and submissive to righteous living.
The woman's role in the FLDS is to serve her priesthood head, bear children. That's a huge part. There is no belief in birth control, and within the community they have an abundance of ovulation test kits that they get in bulk, and the women are to find out when they're fertile, and the husband would be theirs for those nights so that they could procreate.
According to Kathy Jo, all marriages were arranged by the prophet, and she says a girl could be called to the altar as soon as she reached puberty. So in 1985, at age 14, Kathy Jo began preparing for her own celestial wedding.
I began sewing my wedding dress at the age of 14. I had a very romanticized fairy tale of how it was going to be. I knew that I probably wouldn't be a first wife, but even if that were the case, then there would be others to come.
As a teenager, Kathy Jo attended Alta Academy, an FLDS-only school. where then principal Warren Jeffs was a central figure.
We just worshipped him. He could be very charismatic and very loving. There was even a period in my life when I thought that it would be a privilege to be one of his wives.
Jeffs was so intent on developing young minds to eagerly follow FLDS teachings, Kathy Joe says they learned little else.
We learned the basics, reading, writing, arithmetic. However, we didn't get a glimpse, not even a glimpse of world history or, science.
Jeffs even taught his students that this never happened.
It's one small step for man.
Kathy Joe says FLDS doctrine held that God set aside the moon and the planets for the faithful in the afterlife. So the idea that NASA beat them to it was simply unacceptable.
Far